So before I start, I would request everyone to kindly be on mute to facilitate the webinar. And a very good evening to everyone from my side of the globe, and Eid Mubarak. So as we proceed for the day, as you all must be knowing, this is a webinar on country-led national evaluation, experiences and challenges from Sri Lanka and other countries, that is being organized by SLEVA, which we also know as Sri Lanka Evaluation Association. They are doing it in collaboration with Center for Evaluation, University of Sri Jayawardhanepura, and Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, as well as Evaluation Community of India, which I am honored to represent. So before I start with the introductions, I'll quickly give you all a layout of what to expect from the webinar today. So after a quick round of introduction, we'll have a welcome remark, and then Mr. V. Sibganasothy will make a presentation of almost 30 minutes. Then we'll proceed with the discussion on the presentation, and we'll try to accommodate a question and answer sessions with the audience for 25 minutes, and then we'll close with a closing remark. So without much ado, I would like to start with the introductions. I understand that they have my introduction is being is the first one on the slide, but I would like to start with the other introductions and come to mine at last. So for the opening remarks, we have Amil Ipa. And before I start, I would like to apologize in advance if I pronounce any name wrongly. So for the opening remarks, we have Amil Ipa with us. Amil is currently the Secretary of the Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and is also the Program Director of Institute of Participatory Interaction and Development, which we know as IPID. Mr. V. Sibganasothy requires little introduction, but he's one of the founder member of Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, SLEVA, and he has also worked with the government, and he was a former secretary of the Ministry of National Policies, Economic Affairs, Resettlement and Rehabilitation, Northern Province Development, and Youth Affairs of Sri Lanka. Mr. V. Sibganasothy has more than 35 years of experience in public sector and evaluation. He's a well-established figure in the evaluation circles in South Asia, and he holds a master's degree in project planning and management from the University of Bradford, UK. I would now like to introduce our discussant for today, Ms. Matodzi Amisi. She's currently the Research Associate at Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, CLEAR, and she's looking at the South Asia chapter. From 2007 to 2013, Matodzi worked with South African government in human settlements, and later on in planning, monitoring, and evaluation. She also happens to be a member of the team which established the national evaluation systems in South Africa. For our closing remarks, we have with us Mr. Mervin Salazar, who's a treasurer of the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association and also board member for Philippines Evaluators Development Incorporation and executive director of the Senate of Philippines. Last but not the least, it's me. Hello all, I'm Madhulika. I'm a core group member of the Evaluation Community I'm a core group member of the Evaluation Community of India and a group member of the Community of Evaluators of South Asia. I have been working with UN Women for the past 7 to 8 years, and my work experience primarily relates to issues of gender equality and empowerment of women, and looking specifically at equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations within the UN system. So with this, I would like to start the webinar. And before I start, just a quick request. Since we are trying to close this webinar in a time of 1 hour, to maintain the sanctity of the time, I would request the participants to put their questions in the chat box as and when they arise, and in the question and answer sessions, we would take up 3 to 4 questions in one go and try to answer all of those questions. So I guess I have covered more or less all the grounds. So now I would request a welcome remark from Mr. Emil Ipa.
Okay. Thank you, Madhulika. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining here with us today. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. V. Shivanyanasothi, former Secretary, Ministry of National Policies, Economic Affairs, Resettlement and Rehabilitation, Northern Province Development and Youth Affairs of Sri Lanka, for accepting our invitation to conduct this webinar on country-led national evaluation experiences and challenges. I would also like to thank the moderator, Ms. Madhulika Singh, co-leader, Evaluation Community of India, and the discussion for today's webinar, Ms. Matodzi Asimi, Research Fellow from the Center for Learning on Evaluation and Results, South Africa, for accepting our invitation. On behalf of Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and other partners, I warmly welcome all of you to join this session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Madhulika.
Thanks a lot, Emil. So I would now request Mr. V. Sibganasothi to make his presentation. So Mr. Sibganasothi, over to you.
Thank you. Very good morning, very good afternoon, and very good evening, everybody. Let me first of all thank Mr. Asela Kalugampitiya, President, Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, Madhulika Singh from Evaluation Community of India, Matodzi from Fellow of the Research Fellow from the CLEAR, and also the University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, Professor Kumudu, and Asia Pacific Evaluation Association members, Secretary, and also very specially to our participants, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Today, my presentation on this webinar is on country-led national evaluation experiences and challenges from Sri Lanka and other countries. Let me give me my roadmap. This presentation will very broadly cover the importance of country-led evaluation from a learning and accountability perspective, and also it will draw some of the donor-driven evaluations, joint and collaborative evaluations, how we have shifted from donor to joint and collaborative evaluations, and also it will look at some of the building blocks for country-led evaluation, what things and what fundamentals are required for a country-led evaluation. And I will also speak a little about the national evaluation system in Sri Lanka and our countries that are closely working with us on this evaluation, including Malaysia, Nepal, Philippines, and also South Africa, and also some advanced countries, and also the utility as a key factor or key focus, how utility influences evaluation, how utility is given a lot of focus on evaluation. And finally, I will also talk a little bit about the challenges and issues. Next slide, please. Let me go to the need for country-led evaluation. I think we are all working today in a development context where the development has become very complex and a learning process where mistakes are unavoidable despite all the efforts made to avoid the mistakes. So therefore today what is important is to learn from the past mistakes and adjust our programs and projects. And today mistakes are sometimes, though it is not permissible, we accommodate it because our development process is a learning process. But what is important is that we cannot tolerate or we cannot accommodate if you fail to learn from mistakes. So failing to learn from mistakes is something which will not be tolerated. So therefore evaluations have become very important in the today's context, and especially the country-led evaluations. What climate is there for a favorable evaluation context or whatever? The growing complexity of development projects. Today, projects are not only just technical exercises, but they are all beyond technical. It goes to not just engineering only, but economic, social, environmental, human rights, and various other gender perspectives, and everything comes into the development perspectives. Therefore, when you try to achieve one goal or objective, you may have to sometimes forego the other. So development is so complex, and therefore there is a need for learning, and there is a need for evaluation. And the aid resources are coming down. Not only we are depending on foreign aid, but also we are focusing on domestic funds and other modalities. So therefore we need to maximize the value for money from the existing resources available, and we need to improve our planning process, budgeting process, and policy making process, so that we design well-designed, objectively described, evaluable projects which will make our projects and programs more smarter. So we need to learn what is working well, what is not working well, and why it is not working well, and under what context those are working well and not working well. So today we have moved from an aid effectiveness sort of an agenda towards a broader development effectiveness agenda, where even funds from the budgetary sources and other sources also will be taken into consideration. So evaluation is not only for aid funded projects, but also for development effectiveness, where funds will be utilized from the various government system, even from the budget, for various development intervention. Next slide, please. So we have now trying to move from donor-driven evaluations to joint and collaborative evaluations to country-led evaluations. So I would call it a three-stage process. Originally in early 80s, 90s, we were more donor-driven. They are the bilateral, multilateral donors. They have their own accountability-based evaluation. It was a more of a donor-centric evaluation, where the project, for their project administrative purposes, they undertake the evaluation, and evaluation became a standalone component and donor-centric. And also it was more of an independent, credible, and impartial exercise. Basically, a lot of emphasis was given to independence, credibility, and impartiality, and with very much less emphasis to the utility and feedback. So it was more independent, credible, impartial. That aspect was more given more attention, whereas less attention on the utility. And also lack of ownership. Partner countries did not have much ownership in the evaluation process. They do not get actively involved in the evaluation. Evaluation was treated as a confidential document by the donor sometime in early 80s, 85s. When I was working in the evaluation units, I used to get evaluation reports which are highly strictly restricted, highly confidential. That type of reports we get. So the lack of ownership is there, and also findings are also therefore not owned by us. So we don't use the findings because when we don't have an ownership, and we try to not to use those findings because it is done completely outside our control. So therefore, in that context, the donor-driven evaluations were more donor-centric and did not serve the purpose of lessons learning and feedback. In the middle period, there was a shift in focus from partner donor collaborative evaluations, from the donor evaluations to partner donor collaborative evaluation. Donors felt that when they do the evaluations, those evaluations are not taken seriously by the governments. Governments, when they get the report, they will file it. I remember some time back when I was in the evaluation unit, I get the report, but my head of department will say in 80s, 90s, early 90s, please file this. It is an administrative requirement of the donors, and we file it. So therefore, donors felt that the evaluations were not taken seriously, neither taken seriously nor integrated into the planning process, budgeting process, policy making process, and program management process. And in other words, we are not learning from the evaluation. It became a one-sided evaluation. So there was a shift in thinking from donor-centric evaluation to how to involve countries, how to involve country leadership. So therefore, the collaborative evaluations were donor partner collaborative joint evaluations were coming up, and basically the joint steering committees with the donors and partner country, joint reference group, joint management group, peer reviews, joint evaluation questions where evaluation questions are designed both by donors as well as partner countries jointly, and finally the utility was also given some focus in that whole evaluation. So the evaluation became a reasonable platform for shifting the focus from a donor to a more slightly towards partner country, where utility became an important process. And the joint evaluation has also two very important aspects. One was capacity building. Partner countries did not have much capacity in undertaking evaluations, so the capacity building took place through the collaborative joint evaluations, and also evaluations lessons were fed into the planning process because we had some amount of ownership when we worked with the donor. The findings were not donor findings but joint findings by donor and partner country, so therefore some element of ownership was there, and the evaluation started to grow with the utility focus. Though the independence, credibility, objectivity was there, still it was gradually shifting towards a utility focused evaluation. Now let me explain the building blocks, the third slide, which is important to make a country-led evaluation. What are the building blocks or fundamentals required for a country-led national evaluations? We are all today worried about country-led evaluations because joint evaluations, though good, the donors felt it, to make it a stronger feedback, they felt it that it is important to have a country-level evaluation system. Not only the donors but also the development community thought about it. And when it comes to building block, I would say the first building block is the national evaluation policy. One has to have a national evaluation policy which makes evaluation mandatory, and within the government's policy cycle, program cycle, and some of the countries wanted to put this evaluation policy through a circular, whereas some other countries wanted to pass through an act of parliament. If I remember correctly, the GPRA, Government Performance and Results Act in USA in 1993 was an act of parliament through which they included into they formulated the national evaluation policy, whereas in some other countries like Sri Lanka, they had not an act, but it was a circular. And now we are in the process of, with the parliamentarians' involvement and all, we are in the process of establishing a national evaluation bill, already been enacted, and sort of, process is there, and it is to be legalized, and it is to be passed through the act of parliament. And that process with the National Evaluation Commission is in place, and we are in the tail end of that process. So we don't want only the circular, but we are also keen to have it as an act of parliament, so that whatever change happens, still the evaluation will be sustained and continued. So the policy is very important. The second area, what is important, is a institutional architecture. When the ministry was formulated in early 90s, I remember I was working in the Ministry of Policy Development and Implementation, where the evaluation unit was established with the support of the Asian Development Bank and the UNDP, and they were basically establishing an evaluation unit where a lot of evaluations were starting to undertake, and with capacity building and all. And the Ministry of Finance, Economy and Policy of the government of Sri Lanka is now the structure within which this evaluation institution is properly placed, and it is taking it forward. When it comes to South African country, we can take South Africa, the presidency. They have the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation within the presidency structure. So you can say the high level involvement. In our country, it is under Prime Minister, the Ministry of Finance. So presidency under South Africa. And also in Malaysia, if you take, it is under Prime Minister's office, where we have the Implementation Coordination Unit, which you call it ICU in Malaysia. And when it comes to USA, they have this Government Accountability Office, where it is the Auditor General who is empowered with evaluation. In other words, it is not within the executive or administration, but it is outside, so that it will be a more independent. They wanted it to be more independent. And not only when I say central agencies, but also it is important to make sure that the line ministries are also having an evaluation unit. So in our country, we have the line ministries having a evaluation unit, strategic unit, and also provincial councils are also at the subnational level, they have an evaluation unit. So this process is going on. So institutional architecture is important. The third part is national evaluation plan. We need a 3-year rolling national evaluation plan. It all depends on the country to country. Now, say for example, Sri Lanka, South Africa, we do share the same similarity where we have identified projects for 3 years and we try to roll out our evaluations, those selected projects, not all projects, because we may not be able to spend money on all the evaluation of all the projects. Monitoring, of course, can be done for all projects, but when it comes to evaluation, you have to be selective, and let's see the what criteria are used. Basically, if it is a strategic project, if it is a problem project, if it is a project of a replicable nature, then you may have some criteria to select the projects, and then you place it in the national evaluation plan. Not only national evaluation plan, but also ministries also have a ministerial evaluation plan. Every ministry sometimes may want to undertake evaluations. They may have a ministerial evaluation plan, and at the provincial level, you may have a provincial evaluation plan. In South Africa also the similar experience, where the central agency DPME has a national evaluation plan. When it comes to Gauteng, I was able to visit Gauteng, their state, where they were able to have a provincial evaluation plan within the province, and they were trying to undertake evaluations based on a 3-year rolling plan, and that is equally important. And then the sensitization of policymakers. We need to make sure the evaluation is demanded by parliamentarians, policymakers. Creating a demand is important. Now, the parliamentary committee, the Parliament Select Committee is working on that. And also there is a forum, parliamentary forum on evaluation, which supports parliamentarian with knowledge and sensitization, so that they can also involve actively asking for evaluation. So the demand for evaluation is emerging, and sensitization of policymakers is fundamental and important. And then comes the next area, is the national evaluation capacity development. You need to have capacity. Capacity for what? Capacity for commissioning, capacity for managing, capacity for conducting, capacity for using of evaluation. So the competencies framework of the UNEG, United Nations Evaluation Group, sets out very clearly the competency framework required. And the competencies are important not just only for conducting evaluation, but also for managing and also for using. And then we have included in the Sri Lanka Institute for Development Administration, which is a technical training arm of the government, an evaluation module has been included. Similarly, universities are gradually increasingly getting involved in evaluation modules. University of Colombo, University of Postgraduate Institute of Management, they have some modules in the master's degree. And also very specially, we have the Center for Evaluation, where the University of Sri Jayawardhanapura has a very special postgraduate diploma program for evaluation. So capacity building is also very, very vital to make sure that the evaluation is put in place. And also we need powerful champions and change agents who can make this evaluation. So therefore, champions, change agents can be ministers, can be high level officials, can be leaders, can be even ministry level senior people who can take this forward with some passion, with some interest. And also we get civil society also, those people who are champions and change agents who are actively involved in advocacy. So when it comes to evaluation at country level, you need to also have an institutionalized evaluation system, where evaluation should be built into the public policy and development cycle. Basically, it should get into the planning process. It should get linked to the planning process. It should get linked to the budgeting process. It should get linked to the program management and parliamentary accountability process, and the policy making process, it must get involved. So the evaluation cannot be a standalone component. It has to get linked and with all the planning, budgeting, policy making, program management process, and we call it not only national level, but also at subnational level. So it's a whole of government approach. In some countries which are advanced, they have gone up to whole of society approach, where they involve civil societies actively in the evaluation. So outside the government, when you involve people, then it becomes a whole of government approach. In Sri Lanka and most of our countries, we are whole of government approach, but gradually trying to shift with the eval partners, with this Sri Lanka Evaluation Association and also Center for Evaluation and the voluntary professional evaluation associations. We are trying to make it a wider whole of society approach. And also evaluation, one of the most important thing is the independence, credibility. These are very important from the very beginning onwards, but now today we also focus on utility, where people like famous authors like Michael Quinn Patton already emphasized on the importance of utility, not only independence and credibility and objectivity and impartiality, but more important is also the use of evaluation. Evaluation must get into the planning, budgeting process, make decisions, and also change the process, and it must make a change. That's very important. And evaluability is very important. When evaluation is to be done, I think we must make sure from the planning onwards, we do the evaluation. That means we must think about the program theory. A good theory of change must be articulated well into the project preparation stage, where the project must be articulated with a theory of change with inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. It need not be a linear approach, but still the theory of change must be put in place. Maybe a logical framework or a design matrix where key performance indicators are identified so that it becomes easy for evaluation, and data is important, and who are the users coming from. The demand is also important when it comes to evaluability. And also a good country-led evaluation also requires norms, standards, quality assurance, and also ethics. Some ethical principles are very important: conflict of interest, and also sensitive to gender, sensitive to people who are indigenous community, how you speak with minorities. All these are matters of concern, and therefore norms, standards, and quality assurance and ethics are vital in an evaluation process. And also when it comes to country-led evaluation, it is also important to have guidelines and practices. Today, the USAID ST-GAP projects, strengthening the democratic governance and accountability project of the USAID, is supporting to build up guidelines, practices, training manuals, and also practitioners guidelines and all, which are very important. So to improve further, upgrade it, whatever the documents that you had earlier, today evaluation is changing, approach is changing, methodologies are changing, dissemination approaches are changing. So therefore you need to update your guidelines, you need to improve your practitioners manuals and make sure that it is updated to the latest levels, and you ensure that through those technical support from the USAID ST-GAP project. And also user-friendly report, very important. When it comes to evaluation, if you want a country-led evaluation, sometimes in the country, government at a higher level, secretaries of ministries, finance ministry secretary, president secretary, those people don't have much time. So you need to structure your evaluation reports with an executive summary, and we have 1320. 1320 stands for one page high-level executive report, 3-page executive report, 20-page maximum report. And South Africa has 1525, 1-page executive summary and 5-page high-level summary, then executive summary, and then 25-page. 1525 stands for 25. So you need to not only design your reports in such a way, but also make sure that the reports are tailored to different people. It is not producing a stockpile of reports, but making sure that the reports are fed into the planning process and it is consumed, and the management responses, which is very important in the next step, where management responses, either management agrees with the findings or disagrees. If they agree with the findings, they must tell they are agreeable, and when do you implement it? Then the implementation improvement plan must be there. And finally, evaluation must also help to make decisions to scale up your project, scale down your project, modify your project, amend your project, and even sometimes abandon your project. Sometimes if the project is not working at all, and if it is going to be a project which has been not designed properly, then you may have to stop further going with the project, and you will reduce your expenditure so that you will save your resources. So management responses, improvement plan, decision making, these are very important. And also very importantly, evaluation must be a knowledge management system. So therefore, I remember in early 90s when we established the evaluation unit in the Ministry of Policy Development and Implementation, we had a national evaluation system, a repository where all the evaluation reports, whether you do it or somebody outside does it, it is all stored and retrieved, and the findings, recommendations, lessons, key issues are all fed into the report, and you can always retrieve the report. So it becomes a knowledge hub or knowledge management structure where one can go and see the evaluation report. It's not only evaluation report, but also the synthesis of evaluation. Basically, if it is a road project, all the road projects are summarized and findings are synthesized. So like sector-wise, you may synthesize it. So that type of a knowledge product is also equally important. And then it helps you to feedback the process. So feedback is important. When it comes to country level national evaluation system, why it is important? Country ownership is important. If you don't own, if the country doesn't own the evaluation, you can't learn. You will not learn because it's outsiders evaluation report. We don't want to take any outsiders evaluation reports as given. And also accountability is important. We are concerned about, our parliament is concerned about accountability for results. So if you want to place the report in the parliament will accept only who has done it. If it is a countryman involved, the local people involved, the community involved, and also the government has taken a independent, although it has to be independent, credible, unbiased, but some ownership, country ownership is there, that report becomes an acceptable report. And today, evaluations, country-led evaluations, even 2030 development agenda, lot of emphasis is given. UN resolution has very clearly stated the country-led evaluation is fundamental, and evaluation capacity development is very important. And they have declared 2015 as an international year of evaluation. All these are very clear indication of evaluation being institutionalized at the country level. And also when it comes to SDGs, we need to have good projects, smart projects, a very good theory of change. So therefore, to see whether smart projects are there, good theory of change is articulated, evaluation helps and the learning helps, and then you build up your project in a smart way that will contribute to achieve the SDG goal. So in a context today, we are all moving towards, in a big way, towards country-led evaluation. No more much on donor evaluation. Donors are also, every time when they come to the countries, they want to have collaborative joint evaluations where they want to partner with the partner countries and do the evaluation, so that the ownership is shared and you become mutually accountable. Not only the donor is accountable, but also the partner country becomes accountable in terms of the Paris Declaration. So the OECD DAC evaluation criteria is also widely used, because this criteria helps us to ask the first step of the right question. You need to ask the right question. So this helps. Earlier it was REES, relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, impact, and sustainability. Very recently, there were some concerns about whether the OECD DAC criteria is has to be adjusted in terms of the SDG goals, SDG era. Then the coherence principle was also included to see whether the implications of the project on the other sectors, other projects, so that projects will have impact on the other sectors and other programs. So coherence included. So we follow, most of the partner countries, they do follow. South Africa, maybe Malaysia, maybe Sri Lanka. We all follow in other countries as well on the OECD DAC evaluation criteria, which includes, I may not go to the other next place. The evaluation criteria is there, and you frame your evaluation questions based on the criteria, and then you have the questions like, relevance. Is the project relevant? Is the theory of change relevant? Is the theory and the priorities are in line with the national development plan and the sector plan? Are they relevant in terms of the context? Are they addressing the problem? Efficiency in terms of time, cost, quality, and all. In terms of effectiveness, is it producing the desired results? Impact, whether has it got the long-term impact, long-term results? Is it sustainable? Can the project, even after the termination of the external assistance or funding, can it continue to deliver the services? What about the handing over? What about the operation and maintenance? Is there arrangements for sustainability? All those aspects are taken care during this DAC evaluation criteria. So the evaluation questions and criteria, and finally the questions will lead to indicators, and the indicators will lead to scoring, and finally you rate the projects as highly successful, successful, partly successful, unsuccessful. Every evaluation will have to rate projects in terms of its success rate. And also the national evaluation policy framework is very important, because it is not only it makes evaluation mandatory, but also it brings evaluation into the public policy, and also it supports country system. There are so many country systems we have. We have an external resources system, we have an accounting system, we have an environmental impact system, we also have an evaluation system, we have an auditing system. So the systems must be in place. So that's very important. And whole of government approach, which I have already explained. And also it is important to have a national, ministerial, provincial evaluation plan, which is very important. When you try to put the projects into the plan, you have to make sure that all your plans are not, all your projects are not covered here, but selectively you do the selection. You now Sri Lanka, when we select the projects, we see whether is it a strategic project, is it a project of a public interest, is it a project that is replicable in nature, is it going to be replicated, is it an innovative project, or is it a project that has a lot of problems. Then we may try to put it into our evaluation plan and try to undertake an evaluation, and the type of evaluation, the budget and the users will have to be identified. Finally, the next area, next slide, please. The next slide, next. And then we also, next one. National evaluation system, commissioning, managing and conducting evaluations. Next one, please. We need to make sure that the evaluation is conducted in a systematic way, where we call for evaluation proposals. Next one, we call for evaluation proposals. Yeah, we call for evaluation proposals from various ministries, and they submit their proposals, and then it is a call for proposal, and then you assess the proposal whether they are strategic in nature, whether they are of a public interest, whether they are problem in nature. Then you include it, you assess and you try to include into the national evaluation plan or provincial plan or ministerial plan, and then you start commissioning. When you say commissioning, you appoint your management group, the reference group, the terms of reference are prepared, the evaluation questions are prepared, and then you start working on the commissioning part. And then you have your procurement process, where you try to select, if it is outsider to be evaluated, the evaluation has to be provided by a service provider. Then you start with the procurement process and you select the evaluator. Then you have the desk research, where he reviews through the desk research, and then scoping session, then the inception report, then the field reports are there, then the evaluation report. I said 1320, where one page high level report, 3-page executive summary, and 20-page report, and with management responses and improvement plans. And finally, you need to also disseminate the evaluation report. Next one, please. Next one. Very slow. Now we will go into the dissemination and feedback, country-led evaluation. Utility is the fundamental criteria in today's context, according to Michael Quinn Patton. He says utility of any evaluation is the prime criteria for judging its worth or merit, regardless of the technical, practical and ethical merit. So therefore, utility should be given a lot of emphasis. Dissemination is important. You have to make sure that your evaluations are influential evaluations that make a change. Actionable recommendations are important. You need to make sure that the management response is strongly embedded into your evaluation. You need to make sure your improvement plans are there, so that your evaluation findings finally get into the planning process, budgeting process, program management process, and also decision making process. That is very important. And also independence, credibility, utility. Those three are fundamentally important. And also one need to be careful about evaluation, because evaluations are done for two reasons, either for accountability or learning. If it is purely for accountability, then it has to be more independent and credible. Whereas if it is for learning, the use of the evaluation will have to focus on the utility part. So utility versus independence and credibility. These are a little bit of a challenging nature. If you try to go for too much independence, then the utility part will have to be little foregone. If you try to focus more on the utility part of learning, then you may have to forego the accountability part. So you have to draw a very systematic and balancing between the tensions of accountability and learning is very important in the evaluation context, and it is a very practical challenge. And then what are the issues? Let us go to the straight away to the next challenges and issues. When it comes to evaluation, we do a lot of evaluations, and those evaluations are rigorous evaluations. They are not rapid, but mostly high level people like Prime Minister, President, when they ask, they will ask for quick evaluation, rapid evaluation. Within 1 week, they want the evaluation report, within 3 weeks. But a rigorous evaluation will take about 8 months. So how do you manage? I think Professor Michael Bamberger has done some work on rapid evaluation methodologies, where you call it a shoestring evaluation or real world evaluation under budget constraint, under data constraint, under resource constraint, how you undertake evaluation. I think this is some area that we have to work on it and make sure that the rapid evaluation is also there. Rigor is important, but at the same time, to meet the requirements of policymakers, you need to complement with the rapid evaluation methodologies as well. And then the supply of skilled evaluators. I think the evaluation skills is very important. We need to make sure not only in the government, but also the consultancy industry. The consultancy industry also lacks competent people who are competent in evaluation. So therefore, it is important to make sure evaluation capacity building takes place and professionalization also takes place. And thanks to the University of Sri Jayawardhanapura, where the Center for Evaluation is doing some work, and similarly other universities and SLIDA and all are doing. Then the third area of challenge is the data credibility. Is the data credible? Is the National Statistical Office working on data? Are the projects giving us enough substantial data collections are there, whatever we require? So therefore, data collection and the credibility is very important. And the next area of challenge is the program theory. If some of the countries, even Sri Lanka, South Africa, I remember when some of the projects are to be evaluated, they have difficulties. When I checked up with the head of the evaluation of the South African DPME, the head of was telling that we have some challenges like Sri Lanka is having. The theory of change is sometimes not articulated well at the planning stage in the project. So when theory of change is not articulated well, and when the KPIs are not identified properly with means of verification and risk and all, then it becomes a little difficult to evaluate. So we have to make sure that the evaluation is done, the work on evaluation is done at the upstream, where at the planning level itself, you have to make sure your projects are well designed with a good theory of change and their evaluability is there, so that we will be able to evaluate. And also buy-in is important. We have to make sure that the buy-in is important, so that somebody who are users, parliamentarians, policymakers, decision makers, budgeting authorities, national planning authorities, they must be able to get involved, engaged in the evaluation, so that they will use the evaluation. Otherwise, they won't know what the evaluation is all about, what the findings are all about. So buy-in is very, very important, and you must make sure that their engagement is there. And sometimes I remember when during the 2019, we were able to strongly improve the project submission format with a strong evaluation component, where lessons learned from the previous projects or previous phases of the project will be incorporated into the new project submission format in the National Planning Department. So in other words, they are trying to make sure that the evaluation lessons are embedded into the planning process. And quality is of course important. You have to have peer reviews, quality assessment, very important. And finally, use of evaluation, involve users, especially reference groups, evaluation questions, and user requirements are all fully met. If the evaluation do not meet the requirements of those people who are interested to use the evaluation, if the evaluations do not address the evaluation questions which are of interest to the policymakers, then they may not be interested. And to conclude, in a country level evaluation system requires many actors to play different roles. The government will have to play a very active role in formulating the national evaluation policy, putting out an evaluation system in the country, a country system, country-owned, country-led, country evaluation system, and there must be commissioners to undertake evaluation. There must be users to use the evaluation, and the evaluation must be linked to the planning and budgeting and program management and policy making process, so that government has a bigger role to play. Similarly, the parliamentarians have a role to play. Parliamentary accountability is important. Parliamentarians will have to demand for evaluation. Today, we have the parliamentary forum in Sri Lanka, where all the parliamentarians have got together demanding for evaluation. So evaluation demand comes from parliamentarians. Then you have evaluation consultants. Also the consultancy industry, if they don't have good evaluators, then it becomes a bottleneck. So therefore we must make sure the consultants are strongly given all the required skills, required knowledge, required capacities to undertake evaluation in a very systematic way. And under the process, we also have an evaluation commission. Now, this is something that came out in the recent evaluation bill, which was initiated at the parliament by the parliamentary committee, where a select committee was put out, and they say national evaluation commission is important, and that commission should be act like a regulator, putting out norms, standards, ethics, and make sure that evaluation is professionalized and evaluation is taken seriously by the parliament, and making sure that the lessons are learned and put into place, and that type of evaluation commission is being proposed. And you have the voluntary professional evaluation organizations and the evaluation networks like Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, Asia Pacific Evaluation Network, Asia Pacific Community of Practice on Managing for Development Results, and the Indian Community of Evaluators of India. These type of organizations have a bigger role to play in terms of advocacy and promotion. So they also need to work on this whole process. And finally, the Auditor General. Auditor General is somebody who is interested in performance audit. So therefore, it is important to. So we need to include evaluation into the performance audit also. The CSOs, development partners, especially donors, ADB, World Bank, USAID, especially now USAID is supporting. The technical support is provided in terms of MFDR, Managing for Development Results, in terms of supporting the evaluation culture, evaluation parliamentary process, evaluation guidelines, evaluation practices, national, provincial level. So I think these are areas that all players will have to work. I think country-led evaluation is fundamental, and if we want to go forward through a country evaluation only, we can be successful. Most of the development community has understood that. Paris Declaration today talks about country-owned, country-led evaluation, where mutual accountability has become very important, and results have become very important as well. With that, I conclude my session on this, please. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Sivganasothy, for that very detailed and insightful presentation, which actually talked about how how different stakeholders in the evaluation, primarily the one who authorize the evaluation, who manage the evaluation, who conduct the evaluation, how they influence evaluation, and also how country-led evaluations have organically grown and matured over the period of time and have now become the demand of the day, especially when we talk about accountability in this in the 2030 agenda. So with that, I would not take much time, and I would also request the participants to stay with us a little longer, because I see we would be overshooting our time by some 15-20 minutes. So I would now call upon Matodzi, Ms. Matodzi Amisi, for a discussion, a brief discussion of 5 to 10 minutes, and we would then take the question and answers. So Matodzi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and thank you for the presentation. I think just quick thoughts. I think that nothing brings to sharp focus the importance of country-led evaluation than the pandemic that we are all going through right now. Countries are scrambling, looking for evidence and looking for evidence that can be provided quite quickly. And so with strong institutional support and with strong institutions that are geared to produce evaluation evidence and provided to our leaders, they are better positioned to respond to crisis, to issues that they may be facing. I think it's important to remind ourselves that what we are talking about is about trying to influence policies. It's about trying to influence development practice. It's about trying to influence decisions, actions, and practices that are taken by individuals. And so when we're talking about evaluation systems, or when you're talking about institutionalizing evaluation, what we're talking about is about how do we create a context that is conducive to channel or nudge people to be more likely to make decisions on the basis of the best available evidence of what we know about the interventions that they're about to use. But that process that we are talking about, that we're trying to influence itself, is a long process. It's a political process. It's also about making choices, checks and balances. And it's also quite negotiated, right? And there are many players in the policy arena itself. And therefore, that process cannot be influenced by sporadic demand for evaluation. It cannot be influenced by sporadic supply of evaluation. What you need is, it's an evidence production system that's integrated and embedded within the public service management system, as the previous presentation has just articulated. But also, you can't change culture of how the public sector works and how it makes decisions unless the system is integrated with how you do planning and how you do planning, how personnel is managed, how finances are managed. Otherwise, evaluation is just another thing, that's just additional, and it's not necessarily taken very seriously. So institutionalizing evaluation as a process and outcome of embedding evaluation in the public sector is incredibly important for ensuring that evidence is not excluded in decision-making processes or everyday functioning of government. So one thing I think from the experience, and I see that the presentation talks a lot about South Africa's experience in institutionalizing evaluation. And I think that some reflection from that experience is the importance of what happens at sector level. I think when you look at a lot of the literature around evaluation systems, about institutionalizing evaluation, focuses a lot on what's happening at the center of government. So these are offices of the Prime Minister, the Office of the President in Tanzania, the Office of the Prime Minister in Uganda, the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation in South Africa. And those units are quite critical in sort of setting the standards, the norm for the rest of government and how other government departments must sort of do evaluation. But it's quite critical to also look at what happens at ministry level, because without strong ministry drivers for evaluation evidence, it's very difficult for evaluation that's being done under the National Evaluation System to sustain the momentum of influencing change at a ministry level, because you need ministry people, you need ministry M&E units to be playing that broker role. And this is something that we've recently just documented on a set of case studies that we're doing, that's looking at how policy and practice is using evidence. And we use examples from Uganda, from South Africa, and Benin, and you see how it's quite critical what actually is happening at ministry level. The other thing also to sort of reflect on is that there are different instruments that are used for institutionalization, and those institutions or those instruments must be chosen on the basis of the context that you're working with. And also the kind of political support that exists in that particular country or in that particular department for institutionalization of evaluation. And also, I think the third thing to remember is that, which is something that I touched on already, is that this is about changing and shifting culture. So it is less about churning evaluations out. It's less about putting the systems it's about where are the pressure points where if we put in systems, we are able to change the culture of how the public sector makes decisions. And the last reflection probably is that institutionalization of evaluation is critical, not only for how evaluation gets procured and used within government, but also for how evaluation evolves and grows as a discipline and as a profession. You can see from some of the work that we've done at ClearAA how when the public sector institutionalizes evaluation, how that shifts things for how universities in that country are starting to, for example, to offer courses in evaluation, to offer courses that provide methods that are relevant in that particular country. You also see how that is quite important for the success of the Evaluation Association in that country. You can see the strong relationship, for example, between the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association with the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, and before it was with the public sector, the PSC, and how the two work together to build an evaluation culture in the country. And so those are my reflections in terms of the importance of institutionalization. But I wanted to just end with a few things around, some clarity in how we talk about institutionalization and how we talk about national evaluation system. There is no questions that institutionalization of evaluation is about embedding evaluation practice within the government, or within a management system of an organization or of a government system. But we have to make a distinction between the national evaluation system, which is a system for how you define the policy, define the practice, the profession of evaluation that often is led by center of government ministries, that could apply to both government and non-government players. And that has to be differentiated from the sort of national evaluation plans that those center of government departments then run to implement evaluation, because those are slightly different things. They're not necessarily the same thing. And also that when we are talking about country-led evaluation, that we are really talking genuinely about practice that's country responsive, that's country relevant, that builds the capacity of evaluation and a dynamism around evaluation theory development within countries. Because I think sometimes we sort of use country-led evaluation, but what's actually really happening is that the evaluations are still actually donor funded, and in fact the lens and the theories that are used in evaluation are still sort of Western dominated or borrowed from other countries, and not necessarily a growth of theory and practice that is informed by country context. And I think I'm going to, and then the last thing that I wanted to just add was, our experience from South Africa was that, striving for independence without a focus on the purpose of why we do evaluation, it does a disservice both to society, because we can turn out a lot of really great evaluations, but that are not necessarily of any use to anyone, and no one else is paying attention to it. But it also does a disservice to the evaluation profession, because for the evaluation profession to be able to make a difference in society, it has to be producing something that contributes to producing transformational change. It has to be helping practitioners, policymakers to grapple with complex social problems that they are facing. If the evaluation profession doesn't offer that, what we find is that then people reject it. And I think this point that was made in the presentation about the involvement of practitioners in evaluation practice is really, really critical, because that's where learning happens. I think some of the case studies that we have just done has shown the importance of policymakers, the importance of program implementers running and being part of those evaluations. And that can only happen when the evaluations are country-owned and are country-led, and there's political support for country-led evaluations. And that's where I'm going to stop, and then we can engage with some of the things during their discussion.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Matotsi. I can't agree less with you on the need to institutionalize evaluation. and also to streamline country-led evaluations and the role that different stakeholders play in it, and actually what do we call a country-led evaluation. So with that, I would, I know you started the discussion talking about the current situation in which we are, and how we are trying to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. And our first few questions in the chat box that we have received, talks about on the same lines as to how we can respond to COVID-19. So, Mr. Siv Ganasothy, can we take like 15 minutes to respond to all these questions? What I'll do is I'll club few questions for your benefit so that repetitions and all can be avoided. So our first question relates to how country-led evaluations will change given the COVID-19 crisis, and also given that the funds are being transferred to manage the crisis, and what it is doing is it is short-changing the other development agendas, including evaluation. So how is role of evaluation important in post COVID-19 situation, and also how evaluators should change their roles in these situations? So, Mr. Siv Ganasothy, over to you.
Right. Thank you very much for that interesting question. With regard to COVID-19, it is like an unexpected pandemic which is everywhere spreading, and countries will have to do a comprehensive evaluation to understand and look into through the evaluation process. I don't see there is a separate mechanism needed to undertake an evaluation. This will be a normal evaluation which will cover. In a normal situation, we have a program evaluation, we have project evaluation, we have thematic evaluation, we have evaluations which are sometimes natural disasters and certain common issues that come through. So therefore, in that context, the same approach will be followed, and you don't need to have a very changed approach because it is unexpectedly there is a COVID-19, and we have to change our methodology. I think the tools that are currently there, including the PRA methods, RRA methods, the theory of change approaches, and also other case study approaches, we can always use the existing methodology, existing framework which is already there to understand the situation and also address those issues. So I don't see there will be a separate sort of an evaluation mechanism or process needed. Within the current evaluation process, within the current evaluation context, we can address. Now, we have been addressing in the past various issues, like flooding was an issue in most of the countries. Natural disasters were an issue. All these issues were addressed through the general evaluation framework, which broadly covers most of these methodologies, practices, and also multiple methods can be used. You don't need to use on a single method, but it all depends on the context, and also you can always expand your existing evaluation system to cover up everything. And so I don't see any change in the evaluation methodology or approach or system that we need to cover. Now, even in Sri Lanka, they have prepared, the Ministry of Health has prepared with some diagnostic reports on COVID-19, and the usual frameworks were applied, whatever the evaluation processes, systems, and practices that are already there were applied. But this specific problem was more discussed into detail, and they have come out with some basic findings. So I think the current evaluation methodology it is not necessary to make a change in the current evaluation methodology and approach to cover up COVID-19. It is a problem, it is an issue. We still can use the current methodological framework to address that.
Sure. So, Mr. Sivkanasoti, I think the next question also is an extension to this question. So it speaks about tools and methodologies that can be used to conduct evaluation in the current context, given that field work will not be possible in the present situation. And then we also have a question on, a different question actually, which pertains to Sri Lankan context particularly, of how did the Sri Lankan government and policymaker handle resistance towards evaluation, given that many other countries face it?
Hello, can you kindly repeat it, please? Sorry about it.
Sure, Mr. Sivkanasoti. So we have a question which is actually an extension to the previous question, which talks about, the tools and methodologies that can be used to conduct evaluation in the current scenario, which is the COVID-19 crisis, given that, field work, direct field work might not be possible for quite some time now. And the other question, which you might find very interesting, is actually about the Sri Lankan context. The participant is asking how, the Sri Lankan policy makers dealt with the resistance that they might have faced towards evaluation, given that many countries in the initial phases of setting in an evaluation institution faced that.
How they have addressed the COVID-19, are you referring to the methodology? Or are you referring to a broader methodology?
No,
what
so
they are
actually
using?
the question deals with tools and methodologies per se, because most of the work these days is home-based. So field visits might not be possible to collect data via face-to-face interaction with the respondents. So yeah, that ways.
Now, when it comes to an evaluation, I think the secondary informations are already there. But again, one cannot confine an evaluation based on a secondary information also. So therefore, it is also important to get some primary information, which is very important for evaluation. So using the secondary information, and if you try to undertake an evaluation, it has its own limitation. So therefore, normally under such circumstances, if you are an evaluator, then I would qualify my report to say that my evaluation report has used a certain restricted methodology and approach, which may not cover a participatory, field level, data-based or comprehensive approach to evaluation. It has certain restrictions, and I may qualify my evaluations. Sometimes we have done evaluations with certain restrictions. Sometimes you are unable to do a cost benefit sort of an analysis because you may not be able to go to the field, get data. You may not be able to get certain participatory information. You may not be able to meet the medical doctors and stakeholders in the health sector and those private sector people who are worried about the economic impact of the COVID-19. So therefore, it's a two-way process where on one side the health, on the other side the economic implications are also there. So under such circumstances, if you confine your evaluation to a certain restricted methodology, then you may have to qualify your evaluation report with that. Evaluation is all about also evidence-based information. If you have restrictions and limitations, you can always set out your restrictions and limitations and give your findings subject to those limitations.
Also, Mr. Subgan Soti, you had one more question on how the policymakers in Sri Lanka overcame the resistance that they might have faced while, towards evaluation, given that many other countries do face internal resistance.
I think in Sri Lanka, the evaluations are seen very seriously by the parliamentarians and policymakers. Today, they have been very much interested in evaluation. Parliamentarians have taken a very strong leadership in the advocacy and also in institutionalizing evaluation. So therefore, even in the parliamentary process, they have taken a lot of steps. They have appointed a select committee. They wanted an evaluation study on what restrictions are there, what areas to be expanded. They have taken a lot of interest. And also when it comes to policymakers, also I would say the government has taken a lot of interest in putting up national policies and also trying to come out with an improved evaluation system, which is also linked to the planning and other systems. They are trying to strengthen that area. And also, as I told in my presentation, they have also got a lot of interest because some of the parliamentarians have gone even to the international exposure they got. They have gone to various programs, and especially international program on development evaluation training, which was conducted by the World Bank in collaboration with the Carleton University at that time. Some of the parliamentarians had the opportunity of going there, getting the training, and they have come back to Sri Lanka and they were strongly advocating. So I think a lot of knowledge sharing and also getting exposed and getting sensitized on the importance of evaluation, and also the local workshops we had. I think a number of workshops were held by both Sri Lankan Parliamentarian Forum and also the Global Parliamentarian Forum on various evaluation importance and how it can make a change in the accountability framework, and moving away from mere financial based sort of accountability towards accountability for results, and the Auditor General having a lot of interest in inculcating performance audits into the process, and performance audits, value for money audit, and all these concepts are coming through. And also parliamentarians have also got a very clear feedback that for most of the ministries, what they review through the normal monitoring exercise is not sufficient enough, because they are basically looking at some of the annual reports which are financial oriented, physical progress, and whatever delivered by the ministries in terms of its mandate, but they are not, they need to go beyond that and look for a performance based results based indicators with using KPIs. And I remember very recently the annual report that the parliamentarians wanted to revisit and report and prepare an executive summary which highlights performance of ministries based on key performance indicators. So I think some of these interests have come because of the wider exposure, sensitization, orientation, and also their involvement in the networking and all. So they have got that knowledge, and also the commitment by the government and also by the ministries, Ministry of National Policies, Economic Affairs, and then we have the network of Sri Lanka Evaluation Association. So all these, structures with academia and all working together, I think a lot of interest has been created, and they are actively involved in that sense in the evaluation process. So they are now taking a very, very serious interest. And I remember when we were sitting on the select committee meetings, the number of parliamentarians who attended on a regular basis at the right time, and they were very keen to make sure that the reports are submitted, and what challenges are there, how do we improve our country evaluation systems. These were some of the questions the parliamentarians asked, and then the government officials responded to that, and the reports were submitted to the parliament. So it was a collaborative effort, not only the politicians and policymakers, but also the senior government officials' interest, and also the network structures outside the government, and also the other players, academia, professionals who are demanding for more better information. All these, I think, has led to a strong interest in the evaluation process.
Sure. Mr. Siddhanasoti, I think in the interest of time, we'll take 3-4 more questions, and then we will move towards closing the webinar. Is it okay?
I think it's all right. Fine. Thank you.
Yeah. So we have one more. We have a question on, which one is more productive when we talk about effectiveness and efficiency. Do you think it's decentralized evaluation unit or a centralized evaluation unit within the government? If if a country is just starting to set up its system. Also, there is one interesting question on what roles do you think non-state actors play in country-led evaluations, and how do you integrate government audit process with evaluation systems?
Right. Very interesting and important.
Yeah. Do you want me to repeat that for you?
No, I am clear about the questions.
Okay.
One is about the efficiency and effectiveness of centralized system versus the decentralized system.
Yes.
I would say, I won't say A is better than B and B is better than A, because a centralized system is important for projects of a very high value, strategic nature, where the national government takes a very important ownership and a leadership in that process. Those type of mega projects which are financially big and also those lessons are important at the cabinet level. Some of the decisions were taken to support that project, and cabinet approved the project and supported through the central ministries and agencies. And then that type of projects, the central level evaluation is important because it is a highly centralized mega big project where central government, strategically important project where the central government is keen to know, and the cabinet of ministers will be also very keen to know what happened to this project, what went good and what went bad, and why and how, and they may be interested to know about the evidences of success, evidences of poor performance, and all those things. They may be interested. So treasury will be also interested. So in that context, for resource allocation to continue with the next phase of allocation, or do we modify, or do we change or improve or whatever, for those changes they may require a centralized system. But on the other hand, in a Sri Lankan context, we also have a provincial council, subnational arrangements, where the provincial councils are making certain interventions, and those interventions take place at the highly decentralized level. So those type of projects, whether they were successful, how far they were successful, what went wrong, and what component needs changing, do they scale up or scale down, the provincial councillors will be more interested. So for that type of provincial budget, provincial planning, the systems are more on the provincial plan, it is included. It is in the provincial budget, it is included. And the project is taken, executed by the provincial line ministry. In those cases, the provincial evaluation will be a more appropriate forum. So I won't say a central is important and a subnational is not important. Both are equally important, and it varies from type of projects they handle and the interest they have. And the provincial will have a different interest in certain provincial level projects, where they will like to learn from those projects and try to rectify those mistakes, and they will try to improve their performance. So I think there is a very strong interest from both sides. When I go to subnational level, I think last time some of my colleagues also attended some of the provincial council meetings, who are province and northern and eastern provinces and some other provinces, the provincial council chief secretaries, the provincial level ministers, and also the provincial players, especially the high level officials, were interested in putting the evaluation into some special projects they wanted to evaluate. So they were very keen to make sure some evaluations are done on certain provincial level. So therefore, efficiency, effectiveness in terms of national and provincial will, of course, both are important, depends on the type of project, the interest, where does the budget come from, who is accountable and answerable, and who will use it, and how do they take it forward, who will finally improve the program and make sure that the management responses and actions are taken at what level. It depends on that. So therefore, at both levels, it is important. I think even not only in Sri Lanka, but also when I visited some of the countries like Malaysia, South Africa, again, I think they were all concerned about not only national, but also they have a provincial system where the evaluations were strongly integrated at both levels. So therefore, I would say that answer. And the next question is about the non-state actors. How do they play an important role in the evaluation? When it comes to evaluation, I think the state actors have a very important role. At the same time, the non-state actors also have a very important role to play, especially when I say non-state actors, like networks, the Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, the Parliamentary Forum on Evaluation, the Global Parliamentary Forum, the Eval Partners, this type of Asia Pacific Evaluation Community, Asia Pacific Managing for Development Results Community of Practice. These type of organizations, they have certain communities of practice, people who are involved in the non-governmental sectors, and they have a lot of interest in evaluation, and they create a demand for evaluation. And sometimes I have seen they have writing articles in the media asking for government to be more accountable for results. So that means they have raised questions on performance of governments. Has this project performed well? Have you done any evaluation on this project? So media is also having a bigger role to play in that context. So I think non-state actors, especially evaluation networks, plus the chambers, people like private sector, those who are paying taxes to the government, they also would like to know whether government has done well. Are they using our money in terms of value for money? Are they implementing smart, good projects with good results and accountability? So these are concerns by the non-state actors who are shouting outside, non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, and even academia. Also, I would say it's a non-state sector. There may be state as well as non-state. When it comes to non-state, they are building some capacities, advocacies. So I think they have a very important role to play, those non-state actors. They also sometimes go and have a lot of discussions, and they come out in the media asking for evaluation culture in the country, national evaluation culture, subnational level evaluation culture. I think that's very important. And your third question is about auditors and evaluators. I think when it comes to auditors and evaluators, very clearly the auditors are people who have been always, fault-finding sort of exercise. Auditors are viewed as people who certify the accounts, the traditional certification of accounts, whether they show a true and a correct view or true and a fair view. And also they also come out with a lot of compliance related issues, whether rules have been followed, regulations have been followed, whether money has been spent following the procurement procedures, guidelines, tender processes. government rules and regulations. That concern is there by the auditors. When it comes to evaluators, they don't mention the names. They don't say A or B did this. They are more looking at the system, and they are more, they appreciate and depreciate both. They have a success factor also, they say, failures also they say. But when I see the most of the Auditor General's reports, I'm sorry to say that they always try to pinpoint faults rather than saying that it has come nicely. So this project has made a bigger change, and this is something that need to be replicated. I think the financial accountability has put them under too much into a small circle, where they try to see whether the procedural compliances and processes and those accountability for funds and all are there. But when it comes to evaluator, he looks from a results accountability. He looks from the point of view of objectives, outcomes, impacts. Are we achieving the impacts? Are we achieving the outcomes? Why and why not? What are the good projects that made a big change? I remember there was a poverty project in Sri Lanka, which is called the LEADS project, which was local empowerment for economic development, which was a very successful poverty eradication livelihood development project. And the evaluators rated that project as a very success story, which need to be replicated and carried forward. So there is a two different perspective when it comes to auditors and evaluators. But in today's context, with the performance audits coming into play, now the Auditor General is also not just purely the traditional accountant. He's not no more a balance sheet, profit and loss account based accountant. They have also shifted from the traditional accounting to something called the balance scorecard, performance indicators. I remember I had to do some training on logical framework analysis, theory of change, KPIs for the Auditor General. That very clearly shows that they are more interested in assessing the performance of a project in terms of outcomes and impacts. They are no more, they understand the need to shift. So therefore, today, I would say, now today more, they are coming closer. Evaluation is helping the auditors in a way by putting some methodologies, by putting some outcome-based approaches, so that they can, the cross-fertilization, I would call it. They learn from the evaluation, auditors learning from evaluation and trying to improve their evaluation system to make it not just a financial oriented accountability, but more of a performance oriented accountability approach. So I think, is there anything that I have missed on this? Or
No, Mr. Sivganaswati, you covered all the three questions. Yeah. So just to, we have few more questions, but because of limited time, I would want to apologize to our participants where we couldn't answer the question. But since we are running out of time, we would, like to close the webinar for today. But before I request for the closing remarks, I would quickly like to make two more announcements. So APEA, which is the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, is organizing a webinar in collaboration with UN Women and Evaluation Community of India, which relates to the steps that can be taken to ensure gender responsive evaluation during COVID-19 pandemic. This will be organized on 2nd June at 11:30 a.m. India time. So please take out time from your schedules to join this webinar. I'm very hopeful you'll find it very informative and useful. And I would also request for evaluators and agencies which are doing evaluation, both public and private, to join the Eval for Action campaign. So Eval for Action campaign basically relates to the evaluation agenda. This is the decade for evaluation action, especially pertaining to the evaluation to the 2030 agenda. We have 10 more years left with us before we come to the evaluation of SDGs. So how we can push the agenda for evaluation of the SDGs. So please take a look at the website, which is www.eval4action, 4 is a digit 4, action.org for further information. With this, I would now like to call upon Mr. Mervin Salazar for the closing remarks on the webinar today. So, Mervin, over to you.
Hi, everyone. This is Erica Lareza. Currently, Mr. Mervin Salazar is having technical difficulties. So, on behalf of Sir Mervin and Asia Pacific Evaluation Association and SLEVA, we would like to thank our speakers, Mr. Siva, for providing us an enlightening presentation and discussion, for Matodsi for being the discussant and bringing another perspective, for Madhulika for wonderful and excellent moderation, and lastly to all that have joined us tonight and for being such a wonderful audience and being providing wonderful and colorful questions to enrich the discussion. And lastly, of course, to SLEVA and its partners for organizing this event. So I think with that, we could officially close this event. Thank you everyone so much, and hope to see you in the next webinar. Thank you everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
And stay safe.
Thank you. Good evening.
Bye.
Thank you.